Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast, Wide Receiver Strategy Edition. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and joining me, as always, the one, the only, Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. Dwain, recording on Wednesday here. Training camp is absolutely alive and well. Football is in the air. I'm not sure if there's another sport even going on at the moment because I can't keep hearing more and more about the one training camp storyline after another. How are you enjoying it, man? Like, part of me is annoyed by it, but it's so much football. Like, how can you not kind of love it at the same time?
Well, dude, we still love it, right? Because it is football. Football's in the air. Like, literally, there are footballs in the air being thrown to receivers for NFL teams. Get very excited about it. But to your point, like, not necessarily, annoying, but like trying to decipher through all of it, and determining what matters, what doesn't matter. We're very early still, so certain stories we need to react to, right, with our ranks. And there's other stories I'm more like monitoring. So every year when it first kicks off, we get like this huge like bolus, right, of all this information at one time because everybody's so excited. And like even just random fans are at camps like tweeting out stuff like it's official news and people are retweeting stuff. And you're trying to figure out, like, wait. Ramondre Stevenson is not taking over the backfield. This came from some dude with 600 followers and he's not like, he doesn't work for a paper. He doesn't work for anyone. Like he just threw it out there and we're like all running with. So, that kind of stuff is annoying because you got to constantly run down. Like, is this a legit source? Is it not? And honestly, that's where like the beat camp, I feel bad now. The Twitter account, I got to pull it back up. The NFL beat reporters Twitter account. I want to give the official one because he is freaking awesome and I love him. And earlier this week, I made a comment about Bill's camp, about how my timeline was blowing up with like basically everyone was going to be amazing. And he came back and he said, I feel personally offended. And I was like, no, we love you. But it's at 32, number 3, number 2, beat, BEAT, writers, WRITERS. I know you folks can all spell. I don't need to spell it out to you, but they're at 32 beat writers. So anyway, like he chased it down actually and said, time out, folks, like tap the brakes on this Simon Charles guy. Yeah. So that kind of stuff is kind of annoying because we got to make sure that we're getting all the right stuff, but it chills out a little bit, right, over the next 2 to 3 days. So I kind of look at it like, early Christmas morning, like all of a sudden everybody explodes. Everybody's opening all their presents. And then you really get into the groove of Christmas Day and you enjoy your time with your family, and getting to hang out and, actually look at all the cool stuff like that the kids got and like let them beat me at video games. Like that's the most fun part. So like, I like it after we get past these first few days, but at the same time, like the initial excitement, like you can't help it, especially when we've been working up to this point all year.
I was able to get a Falcons beat writer to confirm that Auden Tate's the early front runner for training camp MVP. I was trying to get RotoWorld to report on it. Nothing yet. My personal favorite storyline so far, it's our boy Irv Smith, Dwain. Irv Smith says he got a butterfly tattoo on his neck to quote unquote signify that it's a new beginning, but that's not all. He also got a tattoo of the Hulk on his left hand this offseason because he plans to smash on the field this year. Like, is that not a tight end one alpha?
You got to move him up a tier. Hey, one thing, I've talked about this before, and I'm going to be doing this article. I'm actually already working on it. It will come out on Friday, like the top storylines we're covering. And I'm finding that like, I'm going to have to like eventually like cut these down because I have like 2 to 3 for every team. I'm trying to make it the most important one, but like, dude, we just have a lot of backfield competitions. We got a lot of stuff going on with a lot of teams. But anyway, like I wrote an article a while back, like for Matt Waldman over Matt Waldman RSP, because I did some projection work for him and I shared my process and I got a lot of positive feedback. It was really cool and was interacting with people. And one of the big questions I would get is like, okay, well, how do you react to training camp news? And I would wonder if you kind of have a process that you use like I do and the way I think about bucketing information. Like, so for example, if I hear a coach tell me, hey, Auden Tate, gonna be, he's gonna be involved in our offense. Well, like, no crap. Like he plays offense. Like I'm looking for context. Like, because to a coach, like when a coach says something like that, they're not thinking about fantasy football. They're not thinking really what people are trying to decipher here. If this guy, is going to have a 25% target share, right? Like that kind of involved. What he means is like, he could literally be out there for 12 plays a game in a special package. So it's like, I'm always trying to weed through like most of what I see, honestly, on Twitter, and I follow a lot of the beat reporters. I follow a lot of the aggregators. I would say 80% of it is complete noise. There's about 20%,
maybe even 90%. If we're being honest.
I think you're right. Maybe 90%. But I think, my thought process is I'm looking for very specific things based on a lot of the research that we've already done. Want to be open to new information, right? And changing, thoughts. But just wonder if you have a general strategy like that you share with people that where you make sure, because you can really get caught up into this overreaction stuff. I will say the thing I love at this time of year is buying the micro dips on players and avoiding like the micro ups, like because little bitty storylines that don't really matter will move a player's ADP for like a week. Right. Yeah. Like Michael Thomas, we need to pay attention to. The dude nobody knew he would be ready for day one.
That is an injury update, which firmly falls in the 10%. I'd say those are the most important things that we can actually get a hold of right now. The coaches, they're freaking built to say the same damn three things about every single player the whole time. All the beat reporters really are not allowed to talk a lot about the depth chart situation. We do see some instances of them doing it, but that's why we have, also limited highlights. That's another thing that we can't exactly be holding our hat on. Dwayne, we love Saquon Barkley, but if we never saw the video of Saquon Barkley making the one-handed catch today,
it doesn't change the way we feel about him.
Exactly. So that's all.
I love it though, because it's a reminder to people like what his capability.
It's football. It's fun. It's a one-handed catch.
Yeah, because I had somebody. Yeah. See, we're doing the one-hand catch drills. I'm like, no, like I get what you're saying, like because I did retweet one thing, but my point just being is like, folks, just don't. I feel like people have forgotten how good Barkley is and like just how special of an athlete he is. And it's just like, dude, this guy's receiving profile is through the roof. Like, which to your point, we already knew. We're already projecting him that way. It's just kind of visual confirmation for people to see. It doesn't matter. When you mention Saquon Barkley, it doesn't really matter, Ian. He's going to be hurt all season. I don't know if you knew this.
The most valuable thing we're going to get over the next 5 weeks is first team preseason snaps. We were all over them last year. We'll be all over them again this year. Like, that's what it comes down to. Like, who is actually working with the starters and who's not, who's getting the veteran rest alongside starters and who's not, because everything else is, forcing us to read between the lines. What they actually go out there and do on the field, I think will ultimately give us the most actionable information ahead of week one. Like, even like Dwayne, let's say Ramondre Stevenson is now the starting running back with the Patriots. What if this season, though, it's Stevenson, Damian Harris, and Pierre Strong serving as a three-way early down committee, and then they have, Ty Montgomery or a healthy James White on pass downs. Now Stevenson, yeah, he's a starting running back, but it could even be a worse situation. And, out of one side of their mouth, everyone's going, oh, Stevenson's getting the first team reps. On the other side, they're cursing the reality that apparently Matt Patricia is the one calling plays for this offense. So, again, it's just a lot of things.
I think you have to be really careful with those kind of reports anyway, because you have to understand, folks, like, and Ian, like you played football. In practice, coaches do things very intentional. Just because they're playing a player with the ones doesn't mean they're the one.
And this is the time.
Everybody gets a lot of players get reps with the ones.
When you start practice and training camp, that's exactly what happens. You usually have even the third and fourth string getting reps with the ones. It's only when you start preparing for other opponents that you start using those backups on the scout team basically instead. And look, that's how we did it at D3 University of Chicago. I'm not pretending like I have insight to exactly.
Still more than what most people, including me. Yes, that's the level I never reached. So,
and again, like we do, Elliott Shore Parks last year had that awesome practice breakdown where it was like a live scrimmage and he had the first team snap count rates. Like that stuff is absolutely awesome. Just be really careful about the other things, because this is a situation where we don't have equal information coming out about every single player. So there's a lot of opportunities to wait, these kind of random tidbits way more than we should, when other players could be doing the same stuff. We're just not necessarily hearing about it, because that's how this goes. So Dwayne, we're going to be back here on Friday going through all the news, a lot of the pup stuff, and just really taking a second to soak in everything that's happened this week. But today, going to, again, focus on wide receiver optimal strategy. You have this lovely article on PFF.com. Before I turn it over to you, I do just want to quickly list off some of the wide receivers on the pup list so we can keep that in mind as we are going through it. Don't worry, we're going to have plenty of conversation on the Julio, Godwin, Michael Thomas news once we get to that section of the article / podcast. So Cardinals, Marquise Brown currently dealing with a hamstring injury. With the Browns, David Bell currently on the pup list. Denver, KJ Hamler, coming back from the ACL, also that hip. Jameson Williams actually on the NFI list with the Lions. Packers, both Christian Watson and Sammy Watkins on the pup list. My God, is that Romeo Dobbs music? Chiefs, Justin Ross.
I think it might be.
Chiefs, Justin Ross, unfortunately done for the season. That's, I think, some of the worst victory laps on fantasy Twitter so far have been that. No, people shouldn't have been drafting Justin Ross. Like, I understand that, but
it's not a victory lap you take. Come on, folks.
Come on, guys. Saints, Michael Thomas. was on the PUP list. Now he's already off again. Just huge news from Michael Thomas. Nothing but a positive, and we will get to his now highly elevated ranking soon. Giants, Sterling Shepard with the Achilles on the PUP list, and Buccaneers, Chris Godwin not on the PUP list to start camp. Absolute madness. So just wanted to get those out of the way. And of course, one Julio Jones did sign with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Dwain, with all of that, let's talk about your general approach to drafting wide receivers, because as we've said a couple times, man, each draft is its own unique, dynamic organism. How are we approaching wide receivers?
Living organism. Yeah, come on, man. You're gonna get it together. You gotta get it right. I was gonna actually stop if you didn't use that at the beginning. I was actually gonna stop you and say, hey, can you please give the correct intro? And I know we say about that and joking, but at the end of the day, what is that telling everybody? Like, let's stay nimble, folks. Let's stay adaptive. Each year where the value lies in drafts is different based on positions. Is it at wide receiver? Is it at running back? Is it at quarterback? Is it everywhere? Is it just kind of spread out? That's what we mean. Every year is different, but then every draft is different just on the way it's going. So I believe the high stakes draft that we did, or mid stakes draft we did over at FFPC, the Football Guys Players Championship, is that up for folks now, Ian?
Yes. People were able to check that up Tuesday night. Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
It's a great example, though.
Ended up going kind of anchor RB when really going into it, Dwain, we were talking about getting 2 or 3 running backs early. Wasn't the way the draft went.
Well, yeah, we talked about to start the draft. Like, folks should go listen to it because you hear our plan. We're like, here's what we think we want to do based on the way we know the drafts fall. Gets to us. Jamar Chase is there at 10. That's easy. Anyone listening can say, yeah, duh, I'm going to take Jamar Chase. So you do it, right? But coming back around, Stephon Diggs was also there. Okay. He's also not available. And we're playing in a big national tournament where we got to win our league. But if we win our league, we're in a 3-week point race for $500K. And so immediately, like in that kind of format, we're looking at ADP. We're looking at, wow, there's not very many builds that have Jamar Chase and Stephon Diggs, because usually Chase goes at 6. So you would have to get Diggs to fall all the way back to the middle of the second round, typically, to have a chance at getting Diggs. And so we thought, let's let it go. But the other thing we mentioned was, this James Robinson news, again, many news cycles, it could push Travis Etienne back down the board. And we're already projecting, our third round projection on Etienne basically assumed that James Robinson's going to have a role, right? And we were going to probably move Etienne up from there if we found out that James Robinson was not going to have a role. And guess what? There's still a chance that James Robinson doesn't have a role. But right now we know he's at least healthy. He's going to play. So it's based on his passing down work. But anyway, the bottom line being flexible and not feeling that even though the strategy says optimal is you want 1 receiver, 1 running back, the way that the draft fell, we went receiver. But we were also thinking ahead to what could happen. And if Etienne wasn't there, we even talked about it. If Etienne's not there, we may have to take Breece Hall. And are we okay with that? And those are the conversations you're having with yourself. So those are the examples of why you want to be ready to be flexible. And in that particular draft, you guys can go check it out. People just kept hammering running backs. We had a very unique situation where team 1 took 10 running backs in a row, 10 or 11. He took some tight ends as well. But it pushed all the backs. When he's turning from the one spot back, like it really put pressure on the rest of the draft room. And so we honestly decided we still got value on Kareem Hunt, but we just decided, like the way they pushed the board, we would keep taking the value on the receivers. And we got a 2-round discount on Drake London as the wide receiver 5, 2-round discount on Kadarius Toney as the wide receiver 6. And we made a decision that team would be built to win, live or die on the way the receivers played. But then we also made a decision to have a strong quarterback and know that really running back depth was our only issue. So receivers look good. Our tight ends look good. Our quarterbacks look good. You made the great call on Deshaun Watson, but at the end of the day, the way the draft played out, we formulated a plan. What's the best way to maximize the chances of this team winning? How can we play into the strengths? How do we minimize weaknesses? How do we take advantage of, the moves that other, drafters are making, and they're hurting us in certain ways. So how do we not play into that? How do we not allow the way the draft is going to dictate what this team looks like? How do we pivot? And typically there is a pivot, especially in a flexible format like that, but that all ties in. So if you folks haven't listened to that and you're reading these articles, you're listening to this pod, honestly, that's a great draft to go back and listen to. Put it on 2X. It's an hour and 45 minutes. Put it on 2X or watch it on YouTube. We've got our draft. Ian's got the draft board up. We've got our tiers up. You can actually see the way we draft, but folding all this information together really gives you the best idea about these strategy articles and how they come together. So on wide receiver, like I want to take a quick zoom out on, and real quick, couple of notes. So this is based on 12 team PPR. I'm using Fantasy Pros average ADP, and this was as of last Friday when I wrote it. So a couple of these things will be moving around a little bit, and I'll continue to update these articles, try to update them at least maybe every week, every other week. The big things I'll try to catch each week. I've got kind of a checklist that I work on Fridays. But if you hear us say early position, that means picks 1 to 4 in a 12-team league. It means middle position means pick 5 to 8. Late position means picks 9 to 12. The starting lineup, that we're setting this up for is the ESPN format, which is it's PPR, 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, 1 tight end, and 1 flex. Remember, 3 wide receiver leagues. That dictates, you've got a supply and demand thing that immediately starts there versus a league that only requires 2 receivers. And so you have to kind of adapt this a little bit based on the way your league's set up. But this is a pretty typical format that most people play in. So that's why I chose it. But wide receiver, if you zoom out, we did this for the running backs. We looked at it. And if you guys remember running backs, we said, look, really strong in the first 2 rounds. Some nice solid options in round 3. In fact, you could start with 3 running backs if you wanted, if the right archetypes fall to you. You don't want to just force it for no reason and pass up really good receivers, but it's an option this year. The same thing is true for receivers. The receivers are good enough. Like you could go wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver in the first 3 rounds. And I do think that running back, really a cliff drop hits in round 4. I don't think there's a cliff, and you give me your thoughts here, Ian, on wide receiver in rounds 3 and 4, but I do think you do reach a little bit of a drop off, and you kind of have this pretty big tier of all these wide receivers that have some sort of question mark around them, right? So you could talk about Cortland Sutton. We really like the offense. We really like Russell Wilson, has a lot of target competition, has never truly been an elite receiver, but he's been hurt, right? He's got a question. Deontay Johnson. Okay, DK Metcalf, they go in those ranges. Really good talents, but we've got team questions. We've got quarterback questions.
You could argue, Dwain, after the Chargers, who are pretty much consensually going wide receiver 11, wide receiver 12 now. We'll give A.J. Brown the benefit of the doubt. But even then, new quarterback, Devontae Smith, more target competition than he's really ever had to deal with in his career.
Questions, in round 3 too.
Yeah. After that, man, I think from Michael Pittman, my wide receiver 14, like all the way to Rashad Bateman, who I have wide receiver 28 right now, just got pushed down a little bit with Chris Godwin and Michael Thomas moving up the ranks. But like all of these guys, man, you could argue it's one big tier. And yes, I have Pittman, 14 spots ahead of Bateman. But more and more in these drafts, man, you talked about how running back dries up. I am more comfortable than ever taking the Travis Etienne, even the Cam Akers, and letting whatever one of these wide receivers just fall into round 5, and then we'll get our quarterback round 6.
Yeah, and I think the thing just, I think that sets up really well. Just quick reminder, folks. So, and this can help you if you're listening to this pod and you're thinking, well, I play in a half PPR, right? I play in a standard league. So just a quick reminder. So when you look at points per game in a PPR format, across running back, receiver, and tight end. So think of this almost like what if it was my flex position? Just overall scoring for positions outside of, quarterback. Top 3 finishes over the last 10 years, 61% of them in a PPR belong to running backs. 65% of the top 5 finishers in a season belong to running backs. So the high ceiling outcomes every year, even though we do get more fragility because running backs are more likely to get hurt than receivers, they still belong to running backs. Where that starts to level off in a PPR league is once you get to the top 10 players, 49% are running backs, 47% wide receivers, 4% are tight end, basically the freaking Travis Kelce rule. Travis Kelce is basically the person in that sample. Travis Kelce, the 4%er. And then once you get to the top 25, listen in PPR, now all of a sudden it's 41% of them are running backs, 53% are wide receivers. And once you get to the top 50, I'll stop here. Only 37% of the top 50 players every year are running backs. 53% are wide receivers. But the point being there, the high-end outcomes still belong to the backs that are explosive. They can catch passes. They can stay on the field every down. It typically does not go to early down bangers. So you can you can set them aside. Don't feel like you need to stack 2 or 3 players that meet that profile. They can still come through with big touchdowns, but you want the pass receiving backs. I'm going to skip half PPR and just jump to the other extreme really quick. If you're in a standard league, meaning no points per reception, 94% of the top 3 finishers have been running backs. So if you're drafting in a standard format and you're shooting for ceilings, like basically the first round should be mostly backs. It really just should be. Like I went back and adjusted my ranks even more for standard because I'm like, I'm probably a tad soft, like on the way I'm treating it. If you look at the top 5 finishers, 82% running backs, 18% wide receiver. If you look at the top 10, 75% running back. You have to get all the way, even inside the top 50, running back is still first at 52% to 42% for the points that get scored in a standard league. So if you're over in standard, just remember that, make the adjustments. We are talking PPR here today. That puts wide receivers much more into the conversation in the first, second, and third round. So again, you can start wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. It is strong enough to do that. Remember the running backs start getting tricky in the 4th round, like you mentioned, Ian, but round 3 and 4, we've got a lot of great, talent profiles, but we have some questions around quarterbacks, offensive environment, quality. Maybe you got a lot of competition right on your roster, but still good players that you're really going to like as your wide receiver 2. If they are your wide receiver 1 and you happen to hit on 3 great backs and you've got a great back in your flex, you're going to be fine with a wide receiver 2 as your wide receiver 1. That's the thing you got to remember. Everything's a trade-off. So it's really tough to get 3 elite wide running backs, right? And then come back and be like, oh, I still got a wide receiver 1. Right. So if you go into a draft, you're like, I have to have a wide receiver 1, like you're immediately limiting yourself. What you want is the most points with your first 3 picks. That's really what you want. You want
simple
the
game.
upside.
Simple game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is like Moneyball here. Round 5. It's receiver rich, honestly. If you look over at ESPN right now, I think there are a ton of wide receiver 2s and wide receiver, and we'll discuss them in a minute. But round 5, wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3 option. I think many of them, Ian, are very similar to the options we were taking in rounds 3, maybe mid-round, round 3 through round 4, and you're getting 2-round discount, on these players. I think they're very similar archetypes, very similar profiles. This is where tiers and archetyping players really comes in handy, because it helps you see like, okay, well, great, I could take Cortland Sutton here, but like how different is Rashad Bateman? And you just mentioned like those were 2 of the players you might have even mentioned.
Yeah.
And you talked about the long tier. And that's what this is saying. Wide receiver 5, round 5, you're still getting guys that are basically in that same tier, and you're getting them after round 3 and round 4. So I really love the wide receiver 2s and 3s in round 5. Round 6, there is a group of receivers with paths to fantasy points and upside. Most of them do have questions. So that makes it honestly and we talked about it at running back, it's kind of the dead zone once you get to round 6. I know people will make an argument for like J.K. Dobbins, but at the same time, like, yeah, we like Dobbins' talent profile, but like, how healthy is he going to be? Is it still going to be a committee? Lamar Jackson's still going to take part of the carry. So even if the Ravens are run heavy again, like it just kind of limits the upside for Dobbins, unless like he just catches like this perfect lightning in a bottle. And I feel like there's enough questions that it's still the time at wide receiver and running back in round 6 to consider pivoting to the elite quarterback.
And right now, and this is best ball ranking, so a little bit different in terms of ADP, but going right around Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts in that range, Juju Smith-Schuster, Darnell Mooney, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Amari Cooper, Adam Thielen, Elijah Moore. Again, not bad wide. We're still talking about top 30, top 35 wide receivers here, but far more questions in that tier that ended just before that.
Yeah, so it's an easy spot to make a pivot, right? There's enough. We like Jerry Jeudy, like, and there could be a really nice, he could come through with a nice performance, like in his range of outcomes. Like it's certainly there. Former first round picks, got a good quarterback. He's been dinged up. Like, look, there's a lot of things I like about Jerry Jeudy, but we don't have questions about Kyler Murray. We don't have questions about dual threat quarterbacks that could win you your league in the 6th and 7th rounds. Lamar Jackson goes usually in the 5th round. You've got, Kyler going in the 5th and 6th round. You've got Jalen Hurts going in like the 6th and 7th rounds. And then you got Trey Lance, going a little after that. So round 7 to 11 offer a lot of value on, there's some key players like that we're going to, talk about in round 7 through 11 that should go. And they go, and these are, we'll point out some players that go rounds 2 to 3 rounds sooner over in high stakes leagues, right? Where we know that a lot of the sharper drafters have already been drafting. And so obviously there's a little bit of an edge there because they've been drafting for longer, putting their money down. And then in rounds 12 and beyond, there's still receivers to target, but it dips off pretty quickly. So by the time you get to round 12, you don't want to be in a situation if you've got to start 3 receivers that you only have 2. There really shouldn't be a scenario where that's the case, but we'll detail those things more. But that's just a quick zoom out. So let's talk about the early rounds.
Starting off with the early rounds, just again listing the pure ADP first, not exactly, where we're taking these guys. So first round ADP wide receivers: Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Devontae Adams, and Stephon Diggs. Second round ADP receivers: Deebo Samuel, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, and Mike Evans. So again, Dwayne, there's great players here. Like, we all have these guys ranked like top 12. Even if you're a quote unquote hater, like, you're going to be hard pressed to bump them much further down. I would expect Mike Evans to maybe start flirting with the third round based on the good news from Chris Godwin.
Yeah, I think he needs to go to the third round. I mean, if someone wants to take him at the end of the second, I think it's still okay. But just remember, at this time last year, Mike Evans was a 4th round pick in fantasy. And he paid off the ADP on the 4th round pick, especially with the way the season ended for him. He was still a wide receiver 1. I think he's a high end wide receiver 2 to a low end wide receiver 1 now.
I have him 23rd overall, okay. Wide receiver 9.
Yeah, let's see. I just updated my rankings, as well, and that was one of the ones that that I looked at. I've got him at 25 overall in my new rank. So we're both really close. So I mean, early 3rd round, right, is still in the range for Michael Thomas. So let's say you have, and we've already talked about optimal strategy. We've mentioned, like, ultimately, like, if you can grab 1 running back and 1 receiver, but again, be flexible. There are backup strategies. You can start running back. If you can get the archetypes that we talk about, you guys can go back and check out the running back episode for that. But we can also start receiver. You could start with a receiver and a tight end, or a running back and a tight end. Mark Andrews is in play. We'll talk more about him, in the tight end episode later this week. But from early position, so you've got that, 1 through 4 pick. Kupp and Jefferson, they're the top 2 receivers off the board. In most drafts, occasionally you'll see it, Jefferson may go first. Sometimes you'll see Jamar Chase sneak up there. But I'm fine. If Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor are gone, I think in those 4 picks, one of your 2 picks needs to be Justin Jefferson, or it needs to be Cooper Kupp. And you can pick which 2 that you want to make that you want to take. I'm fine. Honestly, if you want to mix in Jamar Chase, I'm fine. I prefer Kupp, and I prefer Jefferson though over those 2.
I just think we have such a higher probability of Jefferson and Kupp clearing 150 targets. Like Chase, I think you could make a good argument he's the best wide receiver of those 3. But man, like, we saw it last year. Like, Cooper Kupp, as amazing as he was, like, a big reason he put up those numbers because he had more targets than everyone. And we talk about the highest talents earning those type of targets. But you know what? Kupp, Allen Robinson, and the offense, not quite the same as T. Higgins, and we have already kind of factored in just the heightened volume inside of those offenses. So nothing against Jamar Chase, still the consensus wide receiver 3. I think, Dwayne, you could argue Stephon Diggs up to wide receiver 3 for some of those similar reasons. Either way,
we'll talk about him in a second.
Yeah. So either way, we're talking about just complete studs in that early range where, should not be expecting them to get too far past the early part of round 2. And that's.
But do you agree? Like, I think if you were to mix in another back, the name is Eckler. I typically will go ahead and take Jefferson or Kupp though at pick 3 and pick 4. Are you pretty much approaching it the same way, or do you ever mix in another back?
No, those are my big 4, and I think there's arguably a drop off after. I'm usually going Jamar Chase at overall player 5 after that. I think so when you start going to those other running backs, look, we're still talking about the 3rd and on best running backs out there, so there aren't that big of holes. But for me, I had those top 3 receivers over everyone other than Henry and CMC.
The argument for Chase, at middle position, right? So because now let's talk middle position. Well, real quick, like some of the combos you could start with. I had somebody ask me about this in my DMs. I was like, that's a really good idea, just to kind of like paint the picture for people. So if you go running back receiver, you're talking McCaffrey and Evans, McCaffrey and Deebo, JT, right, and Deebo, JT and Tyreek Hill goes in that range. If you go running back, we're talking McCaffrey, Barkley. You go wide receiver, then running back, we're talking about Cooper Kupp, and then coming back with an Aaron Jones or a Saquon Barkley. I think you could argue if you're like, you really want to be balanced, and early on, like, you can just kind of choose because, you don't have enough info in your draft to know like, oh, there's this huge value that fell to me, unless CMC sitting in your lap at like pick 4, right? You just take him. But let's assume you're sitting at pick 4. You go ahead and take the receiver. I think, Ian, I'm more comfortable, honestly, with the running backs that fall back to the end of the second round than the receivers, where we get a few questions around Debo, right? We get a few questions around Tyreek Hill. Like, I feel better about Barkley, who slides back, Aaron Jones, who falls back, Leonard Fournette, who falls back. So I think, like, if you're thinking about it from that aspect, like, I love when I'm in pick 3 or 4, starting with the receiver and then coming back and grabbing one of those backs that we just talked about.
That's kind of, we've talked about this comparison before. I don't see much of a difference between Aaron Jones and Austin Eckler's projection for this year. So just give me the wide receiver in round 1 over someone like Eckler that I think, we can see a difference between someone like Jamar Chase far easier versus, the Debo Samuels, the Tyreek Hills, just because of the quarterback change. As a pure raw talent, like, I'm not putting those dudes down, but man, like, just, we can get Aaron Jones, DeAndre Swift, even Javonte Williams at the end. I don't know that they have that worse of a chance of finishing top 5 as someone like Eckler.
Yeah, I agree. So I like that start. If you do start receiver, right, you're talking like Justin Jefferson and Debo, one of these players. You could go Justin Jefferson, come back with Mark Andrews at tight ends, typically falling in the second. Now, if you're in middle position, so you're in pick 5 through 8, you're going to have a good shot at Justin Jefferson. He goes at pick 6 a lot. That's where he goes right now on ESPN. If you're over on Underdog, he's typically gone by pick 4. But a lot of folks, that are listening to this, you're going to be drafting in a league where Justin Jefferson is going to be there, and you're going to be very excited about it. In the middle of the first round, Austin Eckler is obviously, another option. And again, the strategy still holds true. Like, running back and a receiver is going to give you flexibility, but you can go any way that you want here. Some of the combos you could have would be Austin Eckler and coming back with CeeDee Lamb, who goes at pick 18 right now in ESPN leagues. You could go Eckler and come back with Barkley. Get your 2 running back start. And again, they're fitting the profile. Pass catching backs, right? That's what we want. They can give us the explosive plays. Barkley, we got to see explosive playmaking come back. But at age 26, I think we feel confident about it. If you go with Justin Jefferson, you can come back. You start with a receiver, you can come back in the second round. We already talked about the backs, right? You could talk about Barkley, Fournette, all those guys. So a lot of different ways to go. I love the Jefferson Lamb start, Ian. I've managed to get that, like, over on Underdog. Actually, I got lucky and got the Jefferson Lamb start, which I don't know how many of those there are. So again, lots of flexibility. Late position is really where it gets a little bit different. So Stephon Diggs is in play here at receiver. I think Devontae Adams is in play here. Those are both guys that are in my tier 1B. So my tier 1B over, if you guys want to check it out over PFF, you can see it. You can guys go check out Ian's ranks too. But
where do you draw the line at receiver before you take Travis Kelce, though? For me, I am taking Kelce before even Stephon Diggs.
I'm going to go ahead and take Diggs over Kelce, and here's why. Diggs is younger. He plays, in an offense that, is just as explosive as Kansas City. It's going to throw the ball just as much as Kansas City. I like the quarterback. So all things equal, I'm going to take the younger player. And I also just think that Diggs has a higher ceiling. I think Diggs has a ceiling of 30% target share in an offense where, honestly, I don't know that we've ever seen a player get a 30% target share in an offense that throws the ball that much. But it could happen for Diggs. So I feel like the ceiling
with Kelce
case,
though too.
It could, but the problem for me with Kelce is we are talking about age 33. And yes, tight ends do seem to age better, but I think there's just enough more risk with Kelce at the age, especially the way tight ends take these hits low. Now, he's managed to always stay healthy. Like, dude, the tight ends that stay healthy in this league with all the hits they take to their knees and shins and stuff, like hat tip, like, how nimble these guys have to be to avoid those things. Like when it's
that's why apparently Larry Fitzgerald used to offer to pay like safeties to go high at, like, he told safeties, and I believe I heard this on a broadcast. Larry would tell safeties to go high at him, and he would pay their fines if they got like a targeting foul or something, because he didn't want them going low and taking out his freaking knee and putting him on the sideline for 6 months.
It makes sense, dude. The hits we've seen Gronk take. I'm trying to remember the Jet receiver. Like, that was one of the most gruesome, the Jet tight end several years back. Kellen. Not Winslow. Kellen Day. I can't remember his name, but he took a horrible one in preseason that I saw. But just, safety. Look, when you're trying to tackle a dude that's 265 pounds, you're going to go with their knees, right?
Yeah.
Receivers like, hey, I'm going to come in, get the highlight reel, blow somebody up. So, but from this position, I would go Diggs over Kelce. But after that, I think if you want to go Kelce over Adams, like the age gap's getting close enough, it's fine. If you want to go with Adams, I'm also okay with that. But I think Kelce is firmly in the conversation. at the late position, from the picks 10, 11, from 9, 10, 11, and 12. Some of the combos you could come away with would be at running back, right? Dalvin Cook is available, at this range. You could go with Cook and Lamb. You could go Dalvin Cook and come back with Aaron Jones if you want to go running back. You could go Devontae Adams and come back with DeAndre Swift, right? Another pass catching back with explosive playmaking ability. You could go with Cook, and sometimes Kelsey falls back around the corner, right? Especially if you're picking at the 12 spot, you're gonna know what's there. Diggs and Lamb is a favorite. I love Diggs and Lamb. We got lucky with Chase Diggs, right? It doesn't happen very often, but Diggs Lamb, you're getting 2 receivers in our top 6. I think you have Lamb inside your top 6 as well. And so Diggs and Lamb are both in our top. I want to say I have Diggs at 4 and Lamb at 5.
Same.
I think. Do you? Okay. Yeah. So if you got a chance to do that, like that's a good thing. And then, you could go Diggs, Kelsey. There's a lot of ways you could go, but like in these early rounds, like my centerpieces are Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and CeeDee Lamb, a receiver. Like obviously, look, folks, we love Cooper Kupp, but you got to take him as an early pick. I throw Jefferson out here because sometimes he falls to the middle of the first. I've seen Jefferson fall towards the back end of the first at times. He's the ones that he and Chase are the 2 in the first round that are the most likely you're looking up. Oh, I get to take Justin Jefferson at pick 7. Like it can happen. Jamar Chase, you can get him at pick 8, 9, 10. Like sometimes he goes at 6, but there's a range on these 2 guys. So I put them on here because if they're there in the late first round, or if they're there in the middle of the first round, especially Jefferson, like you need to take them. And then Lamb, I put him on the list because he's always there in the second round. Somewhere between the first pick in the second round and like the 6th pick in the second round. I've gotten CeeDee Lamb as late as pick 11 in the second round. So, I mean, and again, that's not going to be all the time, but he's almost always there in the first 6 picks of the second round. And these are all ascending players. If you go check out, my tier articles, like they check all the boxes. These guys are young. These guys have hit on all the metrics we want them to hit on. Lamb has a little more in question than Chase and Jefferson, but I think a lot of it has been due to they just had such a rotation in Dallas of the receivers. It's going to be hard for CeeDee Lamb to not be out there for 90% of the routes this year. So even if he doesn't all of a sudden take a huge step forward in target share, like just being on the field for 20% more of the routes is immediately he's already been a top 24 receiver 2 times in his 2 years.
He's 23 years old. Like, okay, Jefferson and Chase were able to do all this at like 21, 22. That's incredible. Just because CD doesn't like, isn't this big indictment on him. And I again, this is one of those things.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Because this is one people will often find themselves, facing a question you'll face. I put Lamb in here again because of the range you get him in the second round. So in the second round, like let's say if you did start with Eckler and you're coming back and you have your choice between Lamb and Fournette, but you started with a running back, what are you doing?
I'm still going CeeDee. I think it's I have CeeDee in the either 1A.
Yeah. I think you and I have CeeDee both like in our top 15 overall. I have him like in my top 10.
I'm 12th. Like I don't.
Nathan, Yonke and Kevin Cole don't agree with us, so they've definitely got him lower. So I mean, and that's fair.
No, but I think Fournette's pretty clearly in the second tier of running backs. Like I think it's a pretty clear tier cutoff.
So what if you start
Dalvin
with
Cook,
Jamar Chase, and you come back in the second round and your choice is Lamb or Fournette?
I'm still taking Lamb. I just think at this point in the draft, I'm not looking to your point. I'm taking the better value because there's more than enough time in rounds 3 and 4, and just really up until I think to your point, round 7 through 11 really give us a chance to enough value at every position to make up for it. So in these early rounds of the draft, I'm not going to, big time reach on these guys. And I just have Lamb ranked higher to begin with. So.
And let's be honest, in later rounds, folks, it's easier to hit on the backs because volume is such a huge part for backs. Volume is important for everyone in fantasy, but for running backs, you can hit on players and you can work the waiver wire later for guys that just get roles that we didn't anticipate because of injuries.
Well, I mean, there's a group of workhorse running backs like James Conner, like possibly ETN, and I think Cam
you're
Akers.
Talking third round now, like the one.
No, but that's my point. No, but that's my point. I think there's third and fourth round running backs that have workloads that you could argue are first round or second round caliber. So just give me the great wide receiver, and I'll take this running back that falls.
Yeah, I love it. I'm with you. Is there a back that if they fell, that's reasonable, in your mind that you would take over Lamb? And the reason I'm laying this out is because everybody's going to be faced with this. This is a big one. You're going to be faced with this decision very likely in your draft.
I take Dalvin. I take Dalvin Cook over CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, if he falls, and he's typically a late first rounder. So I think, then you're just saying, okay, fine, I'll take this ADP.
Derrick Henry. Like, I'm taking any of the top 6 running backs over CeeDee. McCaffrey, Taylor, Henry, Eckler, Cook.
So if there's a crazy
probably
that's
not
the only way. Yeah, that's the only way. But you're not going to take Aaron Jones over him. You're not going to take Lenny over him. You're not going to take Saquon Barkley over him. I've done Barkley a few times. I'm a little higher on Barkley, than you are. I've done Barkley over Lamb a few times. But again, that's drafting, a bunch of teams. Barkley and Lamb is the one that's like the biggest challenge for me. I think you like Fournette a little bit more than Barkley, which I think is fair. So I have mixed in Barkley a little bit, but I'll be honest, when Lamb makes it to the middle of the second round, I really don't. Honestly, I don't necessarily care who I started with. I'm just taking him.
Like, what's CeeDee's floor this year? Like, obviously anyone can get hurt before the season starts, but if CeeDee Lamb plays 17 games, I don't know how he finishes worse than an upside wide receiver 2.
Yeah, I think his floor is probably wide receiver 18 to 15. And I actually I wrote about this in my tiers. I did a projection based on what we think Dallas's offense is going to do, and a range of outcomes for CD, like on a percentage of routes, and then a percentage of targets per route run. And like if you put it, his median outcome is still really good. His median outcome is going to make him a high end wide receiver 1, but his floor is still going to keep him, to your point, in the wide receiver 2 conversation. And honestly, there's a lot of weird things that would have to go to hit for that floor to be there. So to finish out like these first 2 rounds on receivers, I also have opportunistic buys, and I have that down as Tyreek Hill and Deebo Samuel. Neither one of them are players, that I'm fading because they're really good players, but we acknowledge that this, and you mentioned earlier, maybe the questions start in the middle of the third round. This honestly is kind of where the questions start for the receivers. We love Tyreek Hill, but we've got Tua Tagovailoa. Why can I say it? Ian, say
Tua. Just Tua.
Just say Tua. Tagovailoa.
You get yourself in this hole. You pronounce Albert O's last name. Like, no, just stop it.
Well, you made me do that last year. Like, you made me own it, so I had to. It's stained into my brain. But Tyreek Hill, you're gonna have to battle with Jalen Waddle. We've got a question at quarterback, and I know they have the weapons, and we assume they're probably going to throw more. But this is a coordinator that comes from a run-heavy scheme that wants to just be efficient. What's the best way to really protect Tua? Be efficient with a run game, and then, hit the deep shots down the field, hit the rack stuff in behind the linebackers off the play action. Now, I would agree I'm not crazy about their stable of backs. If you're just really wanting to pound the ball 55% of the time, like you probably want, a better number 1 between the tackles than, what they have with Chase Edmonds. We're not fine. Sony could carry that load. Mostert could carry it, but I think, so I get it. Like when people say, I don't think they're going to be run heavy is what I'm saying. They're probably going to be balanced. We've talked about them, but I think there are enough questions with Hill that I don't want to reach on him. I'm not going to take him in the middle of the second round. I'm willing to let him fall to the end of the second, early third round before I pull the trigger. And then the same thing with Deebo for very similar reasons. We got to deal with Kittle. We got to still deal with Ayuk. It's a run, and we know it's going to be a run first offense. And now Trey Lance is probably going to make it even more run heavy. And as much as we love Lance, he is a question, as far as, what he can do for the receivers. So any thoughts on the opportunity? I didn't make them fades because the talent profiles are too good, but definitely not two players that I'm not reaching on. And when I get to those 2 names, I'm pivoting over to the backs. I'm taking Fournette. I'm taking Aaron Jones. I'm taking Saquon Barkley, all the other names we named.
Even Swift in full PPR, I think. I mean, look, I have T. Higgins and Mike Evans ahead of Deebo.
Swift goes a little earlier, but yes, he would be in the conversation. I agree. I would take Swift over those.
I do. Tyreek versus Deebo straight up. Who do you lean towards?
I lean to Deebo just because a little bit younger. We've seen him get featured in this offense already. Like Tyreek Hill is still, okay, what are they going to do with him? But I think the opposite argument you could make is, well, does Tyreek Hill really have, like, Brandon Ayuk is better than Mike Gesicki. Yeah. Like, so the third target, on the 49ers is tougher than the third target you're going to do.
We're way more.
I think you can also say that. I think you probably pretty firmly say the Dolphins are going to throw the ball more than the 49ers. So maybe it should be Tyreek Hill. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I need to flip those 2. Note.
I do think, when you pay, like, look, we're not worried about Devontae Adams having more targets than Renfro and Waller because of all that freaking money they just paid him. I have a similar sentiment there with Tyreek Hill being the one. And that's why I've been more willing to be closer to ADP with Tyreek Hill and kind of lower on Jalen Waddle, but he continues to fall. Like, to me, Waddle and Deontay Johnson have kind of had this similar ADP fall throughout kind of the offseason. I know a lot of you haven't been drafting now, but damn it, there's dozens of us that are. And just kind of looking at those
We're
two
doing
in
it for you.
when the season just ended last year and both guys were coming off like borderline, on Deontay's case, I think he was a wide receiver one. Waddle was very close. Like, we have this quick reaction. I think when ranks initially get made, a lot of times it's just looking at what happened directly last year. And as we get longer and longer into the offseason, we do a better job of looking at what's going to happen next year. Exactly. So now, Deontay, Waddle, when they were going top 12, top 15, no, I was out much closer to 20, top 24. That's where we are in. And Dwayne, that does take us
fading Debo. I'm not fading Debo, but
I think the whole,
I'm taking him at or past ADP.
I don't know if there is a single player that I don't have a do not draft list, Dwayne. I think everyone could be drafted at the right ADP. How about that for inclusion?
Well, let's say when we say fade here, meaning you're most likely not going to get them because you just think ADP's off, right? Not that you wouldn't ever have a price tag. Like, every player has, to your point, the right price where you're going to take them. And that's why I'm calling these opportunistic buys, right?
I have Debo as my 24th player overall, so that will take me out of the running for him in more drafts than not. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that's fair. Debo was really awesome last year before he had to start taking over running back, duties. So he
was still awesome with that. But I mean, we talked about in our 49ers preview, I mean, his expected points at wide receiver are phenomenal. His expected points when he was playing that little hybrid role, like, he had to be the most efficient rusher in the league to make that happen. And hey, he was, and it worked out great. But it's just one of these things, man, where, like, when the expectation with a new quarterback is that you need to be one of the best players in the league. Hey, it's Deebo Samuel. We've seen him do that before. That's great. But man, that's a high bar to have to get, year after year after year. Hopefully we just see him get those targets. But, Trey Lance, Jimmy G, I made a whole video just showing Deebo the yards he picks up on pop passes, on screens. Like, there's a reason why we're not that worried about Trey Lance getting the passing yards. But again, Deebo last year was being drafted after Brandon Ayuk. Like, now we're looking at this jump, and Deebo is like, it was really close last year in their ADPs. Hey, during the second half of the season, we did see those targets get a lot closer. Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility, Dwayne, for Deebo, just like by a hair, to be the number 3 target here. I don't think it happens, but like, if we could see Kittle.
I think there's a lot more design stuff for Deebo, and that protects him because they know how good he is after the catch. Only when Deebo is hurt do they start really doing those things for Ayuk. So I think I feel pretty safe about Deebo. But to your point, like, it could be closer. Ayuk is a good enough player. Like, it comes down to how much better is Deebo than Ayuk, right? Ayuk, on a lot of teams, is getting more targets than what he's getting here with Kittle and with Deebo. So, I'm with you. I think overall, like, you're getting a really good player with Deebo that's in a quality offense. So the one thing you're not getting with Deebo is a question of, the scheme and who he gets to play with Kyle Shanahan and the fact that, they're going to design stuff for Deebo. So I think that's the positive, you get. So it's not like you're dealing with a situation like Deontay Johnson, right? Where I feel like, there's so many more questions about what's the overall quality of the offense going to be. So I think that's the reason, there's the gap, in the ADPs for the 2 players, but at the same time, you do have the 3 targets to split things up with, and it's run heavy. So yeah. So
right,
the early,
let's get into these early
go
middle rounds, as we've taken 50 minutes to get through the first 2 rounds.
It's not receivers are going to take the longest, but yeah, we'll try to speed up.
It's okay. Now, I mean, in the way you lay out the article, it's natural for this to be more target based moving forward. So early to middle rounds 3 through 4, 3rd round ADP wide receivers, Keenan Allen, AJ Brown, and T Higgins. 4th round ADP wide receivers, Deontay Johnson, Jalen Waddle, Terry McLaurin, Michael Pittman, DJ Moore, DK Metcalf. See what we were talking about earlier, guys? Like, this is why we're saying, don't be afraid to take the running back in this range and let whoever out of this group fall, because there always is one that falls. But Dwayne, 5th round ADP wide receivers, Mike Williams, round 5.
Yeah,
like, if you ever see that, man, like,
you don't get it on Underdog.
don't even hit draft right away, because I want you, like, to savor that moment of getting Mike Williams in the 5th round. Like, go get a bottle real quick and then hit draft. But Mike Williams, Marquise Brown, that's another late one. Although with the hamstring injury, we can maybe
That's okay.
write
It's
it
still
off a
way
little
early.
bit. Still way early. Brandon Cooks, Cortland Sutton, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Chris Godwin on the rise, Amari Cooper, 6th-round ADP receivers, Jerry Jeudy, Darnell Mooney, Allen Robinson, Adam Thielen, and Gabriel Davis, someone that could be going up a little bit higher if you happen to be in a league with one of those truthers. So, Dwayne, this is one of these situations where, again, I love the way you spell out in your articles, because depending on what you did in the first 2 rounds should shape how active you are in the mid-round wide receiver market.
Yeah. So if you started with 1 wide receiver in the first 2 rounds, we want to draft 2 to 3 more. And middle rounds is rounds 3 through 6. So 2 to 3 more wide receivers in this range. If you started with 2 receivers, and remember, this is not just looking at the value of the receivers that are available in these rounds. It's also, we're already looking forward to the value of the receivers that are going to be there in the later rounds and where things tighten up. And also where there's value at other positions like running back. So you may not necessarily want to be stuck on receivers in certain rounds, because it's where we know there's a juicy group of, running backs that we want to take that give us upside later in the season. So all those things are coming into play to really deliver, kind of this prescriptive approach. Again, these are guidelines. So, I mean, maybe prescriptive is not the best word, because value can change the way you think about these things. So always want to be flexible. But if you started with the 1 receiver, you're going to draft 2 to 3. If you started with 2 receivers in the first 2 rounds, then we want to still draft 1. But if the value falls right, we can still draft 3 more, right? So, I mean, we're talking about, this isn't just 3 rounds. So you're not going to use all 3 picks on receivers. It's rounds 3 through 6. And then if you started without a receiver in the first 2 rounds, we want to draft 2 to 4. So remember, 1, we're looking for 2 to 3. 2, 1 to 3. 4, we're looking for 2 to 4. And so the centerpieces that I'm really looking at in these rounds, in kind of reference back, you talked about 3rd round. The 3rd round centerpiece is really T. Higgins. T. Higgins, look, just checks every box we want for a breakout. We've got the young ascending quarterback. Yeah, he's going to have to, he had the appendix surgery, but Joe Burrow should be back. They beefed up the offensive line. Yes, he has Jamar Chase, and they cap each other, right? It's tough. You're not going to have 2. You can't have one player. You can't have 2 players get 30% target shares, but really good players and good offenses can both get 25%. And there's a lot of room for Higgins. Like, we saw the Bengals throw the ball more at the end of last year. So again, you're betting on an elite young talent that's in a really good situation. And if the Bengals continue, what we saw from the second half of last year, there's going to be no problem for Higgins to hit that wide receiver 2, range for you. And I actually have him right now graded as a low end wide receiver 1. I think the talent profile is that good, despite the fact that he plays with Chase. Then if you look at the 4th round, Michael Pittman, man, 24% target share in year 2. Now you get Matt Ryan, more accurate every level of the field with Carson Wentz. Dude, evidently, the Colts beat reporters have been starved to see a good quarterback throw the ball, because they are going nuts over Matt Ryan right now. They're like, Matt Ryan gets the ball out so quick, so accurate. And I'm like, Jesus.
What were they saying this time last year about Wentz, though? I know what they've been saying all offseason about Wentz, but my goodness.
It's a good question.
Man.
You have to go back and look. I feel like it was a bit more rocky with Wentz, but I don't know. It's just they're throwing against air right now. I thought it was funny because I haven't seen this much stuff about Matt Ryan in like 5 years. But
they're comparing him to freaking Peyton. Come on, come on.
I hear you on that.
One thing with Pittman, though, because we have seen constant drumbeat from the beat reporters saying that T.Y. Hilton not out of the picture. They were spot on about Julio Jones not really being an option. Maybe it takes an injury, but man, you look at this wide receiver room: Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Paris Campbell, Ashton Dulin. I wouldn't blame a lot of casuals out there for only being able to name Michael Pittman out of this group. Would you move Pittman down at all if they signed T.Y. Hilton?
No. Okay. T.Y. Hilton's is not a factor.
I agree. I agree. I just want to make sure.
Honestly, they could have signed Julio, and the Julio situation. We'll talk about it in a minute. Was more of a double whammy with also for Evans and Gage, because we also know that Godwin is not on the pup, right? But even if the Colts had signed Julio, I wouldn't have moved. I might have moved Pittman down a little bit, but I still he's just too young with this major ascending profile.
I think the Matt Ryan Julio history would have made that a little bit more of a unique case, but I hear you.
But there's room for 2 targets there, right? You can have a run heavy offense and have 2 targets. When you have 3 targets in a run heavy offense, it gets tougher. So that would have been my thought process on that. But yes, definitely better that they didn't. And T.Y. Hilton does not matter. And guys and gals, Michael Pittman goes a full round sooner than this in high stake drafts. So the high stake drafters over on FFPC, thanks Fantasy Mojo, like they're already all over this Pittman thing. Underdog, where a lot of people are sharp. They've been drafting for a while now. Again, that you must start 3 wide receivers and it's best ball changes things a little bit. Pittman's a 3rd round pick. So right now in home leagues, you're getting Pittman a full round later. I don't know that ADP is really going to move. We'll see. I don't know that there's going to be a big storyline or anything that shakes that up. I think people just generally speaking kind of snooze a little bit on Michael Pittman. Mike Williams would not be a centerpiece on Underdog. Like I like Mike Williams. We've talked about, the AFC and NFC West stuff and 56% of the games projected over 50 points, all that stuff. A lot of things to like about Mike Williams. Really had a huge role early last season that we could, and it could be due to injury that he didn't have that, down the stretch. And so we know what the ceiling looks like for Mike Williams, but we've also seen him for his whole career and it hasn't lived up to his draft capital. We like him, but on Underdog, like honestly, we're probably reaching a tad taking Mike Williams in the 3rd round, but over here in home leagues, you're getting him in the 5th round. So he's definitely, a centerpiece. The Chargers have the 3rd most shootout opportunities on their schedule. Another one, Cortland Sutton is a late 3rd round to early 4th round pick over in high stakes drafts or in best ball drafts. Right now, you can get him in the 5th round. You got Russell Wilson, Cortland Sutton. A lot of people, in your casual leagues, they're going to be snoozing on him just because he didn't do well last year. And he was coming off of injury the year before he was hurt. So people have had 2 full years to really just forget about Cortland Sutton, but you don't want to. He's like, man, if you can get Cortland Sutton in round 5 as your wide receiver 3, like, man, Ian, like, can you imagine Williams or Sutton as your wide receiver 3 in round 5? Like,
I sure can on Underdog, but this sounds great to me. Once,
we're going to go join a bunch of ESPN leagues like that. So yeah, if you look at Marquise Brown, another one, early 4th round to mid 4th round on Underdog, a little later in the 4th round over on the FFPC, but still a 4th round pick. You're getting him around higher. Look, this is a young player with back-to-back 23% target share seasons. He's only going to be 25 years old. You did mention that he's on the NFI list with the hamstring. He has battled some soft tissue stuff, in the past. He's typically been able to stay on the field for the most part. You'll usually end up with a game or 2 in the year that's kind of maddening, questionable. You don't know if he's going to play or not. That could still be the case, but still the coaching staff, they traded a 1st round pick for him. They're raving about, what his role is going to be in the offense. But the main thing is, like, this is a 25-year-old player with back-to-back 23% target share seasons. And you now get to play him with Kyler Murray. Like, Kyler Murray and the Cardinals are going to throw the ball more than what we saw with Lamar Jackson. I would also argue that Kyler Murray is better in every passing metric than Lamar Jackson. Not saying Lamar Jackson's a bad passer like some people say, but I do believe Kyler Murray is an upgrade. Then if you look at the end of round 5, you can get Amon-Ra St. Brown. He sometimes slips into the 6th round. We've talked about him a ton this offseason, so I won't beat, a dead horse here, but posted that 80.0 PFF receiving grade. Here are the receivers, Ian, to do that as rookies since 2011. Odell Beckham Jr., Terry McLaurin, Michael Thomas, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Doug Baldwin, and Chris Godwin.
Whoa.
So we'll just let that all hang there for a second, let it marinate. Absolute centerpiece, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Drafting him, I get him everywhere I can. He is the player, Ian, when I get to the 5th round, if he's sitting there and Kyler's sitting there, and it's the difference of, because of the way the tiers drop, I'm like, I go ahead and take St. Brown because I feel the tier at the receiver does drop right there. And the other factor being, I'll just pivot to Jalen Hurts if Kyler Murray goes. So I will say that I would rather get St. Brown and Jalen than get Kyler and have to turn around and come back with Darnell Mooney. Like, I think St. Brown, like, and I could be wrong. Like, we like Mooney. We're going to talk about him in a second, but I'm just really bullish on St. Brown. And then you can give some commentary here. I'll just mention the last one here is Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson is a huge disparity with what's going on right now on Underdog and over on FFPC. It's a full 2-round discount. He was a top 20 option in all scoring formats, folks, in 2019 to 2020. 2021, yeah, things tanked. It went bad. He was outside the top 75 wide receivers in all formats. However, he was battling injuries. A lot of them, if you go back and look at the injury reports, he ended up playing, but he was playing through injuries and then eventually did get shut down for a period. And let's be honest, this offense was it wasn't operating the way it should, right? They were not playing to the strengths of the quarterbacks. They weren't switching the schemes when they went from, Andy Dalton over to Justin Fields. Not to say they weren't they didn't have some wrinkles, but they weren't fully unleashing what we should see from, Fields. So it's just a scenario where now you get to play with Matt Stafford. It's by far the best quarterback that Allen Robinson has ever played with. Cooper Kupp,
and they wanted him. And they wanted him. And
this
was not a Juju situation where it was like, it's not that much money. How come no other teams were going out there? Seeing, what was it, 3 years, 34 million? I think I have that right. Something around those range. And we had the awesome quote to the Monday morning quarterbacks, Albert Breer, from Sean McVay, who said, quote unquote, I was selling my effing balls off to get this guy. So yeah, Sean McVay obviously wants Allen Robinson in there. We were worried a little bit earlier in the offseason about the potential for this to be an offense with Cooper Kupp and Allen Robinson and Odell Beckham. We still don't know when OBJ is going to be back or where he's going to be playing, but man, not looking like anything before November, maybe even December is much of a certainty. So he's not even on the
only
roster.
29. We're not at that age 32, age 31. Like he's in the range where a cliff can hit. Like it's getting to be more probable, but he's still in a fairly safe zone. So I'm going to lean into the fact like what he did the 2 seasons before. And sometimes we just have a bad season. It happens. It doesn't mean that this is the dip and it's the end for Robinson. It could mean that. But I'm going to put my trust in the Rams and getting to play in this offense.
Opportunistic buys, Chris Godwin.
Hey, real quick on this. So just think what we just said, just to kind of recap that. We talked about draft 2 to 3. And, if you started with 2 receivers and the way we laid this out, like if you go with Higgins in the 3rd, you could then turn around and come back and skip running back in the 4th if you wanted, and just say, you draft a running back there. Or you could take Pittman in the 4th. You can easily get Williams, and it's what I like, the flexibility, Ian. There's multiple receivers here we really like in this range that are going across multiple rounds. They're not all in one little tight section where they go off the board 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it gives you a lot of flexibility if you do start running back, or running back, wide receiver, that you can turn around and you can come back and you can easily get 3 of these players. You can come away with 3 of them, and it's not a super tight needle to thread. And that's a huge part of setting up your draft strategy the right way. Like I've talked to people in the past, and I'll ask them because they'll ask me like, what should I do here? What should I do here? I'm like, oh, well, what's your strategy? Like, what are you trying to do? What do you think you should do? What are you trying to accomplish? And they lay out this big plan, and it gets to round 6, and it's all based on one player. And they're picking at the end of the round, and the ADP is at the first of the round. And they're like, then I need this one dude to fall to me, at the end of the 6th round. I'm like, man, your plan sounds like it could really all fall apart if you don't get the one player.
It's a whole tier.
That's what I like about this.
By the way, quick update on Hollywood Brown. It kind of interesting, man. He was put on the PUP list apparently for a hamstring injury, but Cliff Kingsbury came out today and said that Hollywood actually tweaked his ankle last week while running routes. He did say he doesn't expect him to be out long, but Arizona will be cautious with him. So just continue to update that. Okay, Dwayne, one of your opportunistic buys is Chris Godwin. Again, though, you wrote this kind of before we got the news that he's not even on the PUP list right now. Looking and listening to what the Tampa Bay beat reporters have been saying, I'm not expecting him to be out there week 1 running 80-90% of the quarterback, of the routes out there on the field. But at a minimum, it seems like he has a really good chance of being active and maybe ramp back up. We saw the Giants do that with Saquon Barkley last year during the first 2 weeks of the year. Different position and everything. I understand that. But hey, now having Julio Jones in town, all this talk about Julio, it didn't seem centered around him taking anyone's starting job. It was more so look at the wide receivers that were running around at the end of last year. They wanted to try to prevent that. My God, if Julio Jones is your wide receiver 4, you're feeling pretty good about yourself. So to me, Dwayne, the bigger news from yesterday was Chris Godwin's health being this much better than we kind of expected. Because as we've said, if Godwin and Evans, no injury concerns about either, we'd be drafting Godwin ahead of Mike Evans, especially in full PPR scoring. Man, I'm trying to be aggressive on this now, and I moved Chris Godwin up to, let's see.
I think he's at 18.
I have him wide receiver 19 ahead of Marquise Brown, Deontay Johnson, Jalen Waddle, and those guys who, hey, at this point, the reason why Chris Godwin is in this muddled tier is he has a red flag, and it's his health. That red flag, man, we can start calling it yellow or orange even. Things are looking better for Chris Godwin. I want to be aggressive on this and getting ahead of the market because if it just ends up being more and more good news, man, we're just going to continue to watch this ADP disparity between him and Evans shrink as we get closer to week 1.
Yeah, and there's going to be a pretty quick correction here. I don't have it up in front of me, but for example, I looked yesterday at, Russell Gage and Mike Evans, what's happening like to their ADP just in the next few drafts, right? Once the news broke. And Godwin did move up a little bit, but I think it's going to your point, continue to it's probably going to catch more steam. So I have also moved him up. I've got to update my ranks on the site, but I've updated the app already. Got him up to wide receiver 21. So a little bit lower than you, 2 spots lower than you, but I agree. Like at this point, even if I know Godwin's going to be 70%, the first 3 to 4 weeks, if he's that far ahead, like what does that mean for him? Like by week 12, 13, 14, when we really need the boom, right? When we know that we're going to be in our fantasy playoffs and we want it, we want those points, we're going to get him. Godwin averaged 17.6 fantasy points per game last season. I don't think people realize that. Like it was really great. And he's playing a great role with a great quarterback, pass heavy offense. So yeah, I have him in opportunistic buys right now, but like you mentioned, I wrote this before. I'll probably still leave him here just because like his ADP, I think is going to probably pretty much shoot up to where I have him. And I'm not going to get overly aggressive on him like right away because it's the first report we've gotten. And all these teams handle these things different, right?
Yeah.
So we could hear, oh, they didn't go on the pup. They don't expect him to play the first 3 weeks, or they don't, we don't know what the next piece of news is going to be. So basically I want to stay in alignment with ADP. I want to continue to take Godwin where I can. But I don't want to get too overly aggressive in case he suffers a setback or something like that. But I think, a lot of it just depends on ADP. Right now, I'm going to be ahead. But I think that's going to probably even out in the next week or so, and I'll be closer to really where ADP is. Jerry Jeudy is another.
Hold on. Let's finish.
Let's
finish the Buccaneers conversation because Russell Gage. Hey,
well, he's coming up next. But I know, if you want to just hit them all now, it's fine.
Yeah, let's just stick on the Buccaneers. I have Russell Gage, wide receiver 40 right now, 1 spot behind Chris Olave, ahead of Allen Lazard, Treylon Burks still. Julio got $6 million. It can make up to $8 million. That doesn't take away that the Bucs gave Gage, man, $30 million over 3 years. I think there's a good chance that maybe we see okay, I did see a joke or two about Julio Jones being a tight end, which I did not think was funny. Like, come on, what are we doing here, man? Like, it's Julio freaking Jones.
I think it was more meant though, just taking Gronk's targets, like in that area of the field. But yeah, I saw it.
Well, yeah, Julio, if you watch the film, still did some good things when he was healthy last year. Julio Jones is someone that I moved up to wide receiver 58. And again, this was a guy going outside the top 80, have him still behind Tim Patrick, Jahan Dotson, and Christian Watson. Curious where you fell with them, Dwayne. So I'm projecting basically Julio to be their wide receiver 4, a little more action early on in the season, potentially while they're ramping up Chris Godwin. Otherwise, someone that just, I don't know, man. I could see them really relying on Julio more so for a handful of design sort of shots per game. I'm not sure if they feel even the need to rush him out there and make him a full-time player in the year 2022.
Yeah, my thought is Julio's going to want snaps, and they're going to, they've already been through this with Antonio Brown, So I moved Julio up to 61. I'm just a tad behind you, but I've got him as a wide receiver 5. And he's last night I saw 3 FFPC drafts. He's basically going in round 11 now. So, and that's about right. If you look at the other players that are going, that are in this tier, you've got Kenny Golladay, Jalen Tolbert. Those are all guys that go in like round, 11 to 13. So Julio's going to be in that mix. If he goes up much past that, though, I won't have really any exposure.
Agreed.
I dropped Russell Gage a little further than you, and maybe I overreacted, because I really do love Gage. I know a lot of people I saw, on Twitter yesterday, well, Russell Gage was just always going to disappoint you. And you know me, and maybe they're right, and maybe I'm just wrong. But when I look at Gage, I saw a different profile than what I saw. And like the tweets I saw, look, he's just like MVS. He's just like Lazard. It's the same thing. You guys were reaching. I thought Gage had a very different profile. Gage destroyed man coverage from a targets per route run perspective last year. 34% targets per route run versus man. If you look at the way that the Bucs operated, that's where Antonio Brown was huge. If you look at where Russell Gage wins, it's in that short intermediate passing game against man coverage, against the quick hitting stuff, against the blitz. And so I think Tom Brady's still going to have a player that he can trust. He's also a player that, even though he's finished as a wide receiver 4, in a bad offense, like he's had a wide receiver 2 worthy PFF receiving grade like last year, a 76.0. So typically wide receiver 2s in fantasy score on average around a 76.0 PFF receiving grade. Gage had that. So I feel like there were some underlying indicators for Gage that gave me a little more hope than what I saw with MVS and Allen Lazard, which didn't have those same things. All that said, I dropped him to 49. I feel like I probably was a little bit over, and that's always the challenge with these things, right? Where do we fit them in? I think you're probably more accurate. Like I'm looking at it, like I'm going to take Chris Olave over him. I'm going to take Kadarius Toney. I like Kadarius Toney just because, we've got this ambiguous situation where he could be the wide receiver one for the Giants, and we've got this underlying profile we like. But maybe like right around Garrett Wilson, Brandon Ayuk, Chase Claypool. Maybe that's really where I probably need to fit Gage in. Right now, I've got him just below Christian Kirk by one spot. So yeah, I probably need to adjust it back up a little bit, but I did bump him down. And
that might be a better range. I don't hate that. More of a borderline wide receiver 4.
You're still treating him as a low end wide receiver 4. And the profile that I wrote up on him for our app, I rewrote that last night. Before it was, look, a low end wide receiver 3 that can give you wide receiver 1 weeks until Godwin's healthy. Well, now it's probably, and here's my challenge. Julio Jones, while we still think Russell Gage is going to play more receiving, he's going to get more receiving reps than Julio. Like I still feel pretty confident about that. There's at least a chance Julio bumps him out of a job. And I think at a minimum, it's going to create a rotation because they're going to want to get Julio out there some. Like they've got to give Julio some playing time. So maybe early in the season, that's more from Chris Godwin, right? Because Julio would be great playing the big slot right now at this point in his career. We've seen the big slot really extend roles for, Larry Fitzgerald, Hines Ward, Reggie Wayne. Lots of players later in their career were able to come through in the big slot role. But my challenge becomes like, what's Russell Gage's path now to really having any shot at like 80% route participation? Like he's probably going to have to give up some of that to Julio. And that could mean he's like out there 65%. And like, even in a pass heavy offense with like the Bucs, it's just enough to make me be like, okay, I still want to get exposure to Russell Gage. But at the same time, I just have to be realistic that Julio's going to have some role. And at least there's a small chance Julio bumps him out of a starting role.
I think behind Claypool might be that sweet spot that you mentioned there. I feel better about that situation now. All right, back to opportunistic buys here. And
let me hit those real quick. You go ahead and hit them. Just
Jerry Jeudy, Darnell Mooney, Adam Thielen, Gabriel Davis, and guys that we've kind of been talking about throughout the offseason. Fades, DK Metcalf, and Amari Cooper. Drum, we were messaging a little bit before the podcast just about DK Metcalf right now going off the board over Underdog Fantasy as the wide receiver 25. I agree, even that is pretty rich. That is where I have him ranked, but I'm not thrilled about drafting him right there. I do just wonder as we get more and more into like closer to week 1 and folks are just looking at the Seahawks offense, we get a couple spare highlights of Drew Lock, just sailing a ball like out of the stadium, nowhere near his intended target. I just don't want DK Metcalf to start sliding past fellow number 1 or number 2s in terrible offenses. Like I do wonder already, like why is Deontay Johnson getting the benefit of the doubt over DK Metcalf when you could argue Deontay has more target competition and probably a little bit better quarterbacks, but come on, man. Like, I don't think we can definitively say that Trubisky and a rookie are going to be better. They're both bottom 10 quarterback situations. And I know we feel a lot better about the Seahawks being a bottom 1 potential situation, but if Metcalf continues to fall a little bit, which I think is possible, where would you kind of draw the line on wanting to start getting him? Because my God, Dwayne, we're not that far away from like DK Metcalf versus Darnell Mooney being like an actual conversation. And like, that's the point where I'm really going to have to throw my hands up and just hit draft on DK Metcalf. Or do you look at that and you say, okay, this is where I'm not going to take a wide receiver?
Yeah, it's mostly I'm pivoting away from receiver, but I totally get where you're coming from. That's probably the point. So I've got Metcalf. I had Metcalf at 30 and like I bumped him to 25 just because of the talent. I do think there's a difference between, what we could see with Trubisky and what we could see, with, Pickett versus what we've seen with Geno Smith for a long resume and what we've seen, with Drew Lock. So number 1 with Pickett, at least there's a chance he could be good, right? So you're saying there's a chance kind of thing.
I don't think that's fair.
No, I do, because I've seen Geno enough, and I've seen,
you've seen him in 4 games in the last like 4 years, and he was pretty good in them.
Yeah, but there's a reason he doesn't play. There's a reason he's never been
Russell Wilson.
Yeah, he hasn't just been behind Russell Wilson his whole career. Like he's had,
last 4 years.
Geno's had plenty of chances like to become, a better player than what he is. Like, so no. And when I go look at, the PFF passing grades, like Geno, he's just lower. Like, he's lower than these other guys. So all I'm looking for, and I'm me, I'm not just going to penalize one guy more than the other. I am basing it off data. If we think the data ends up being wrong and leading us down the wrong path, I mean, I think that's okay. Then that's one thing. But I mean, like, for me, with Mitch, it was better, at least, than the other guys, so it was at least serviceable. And we've seen Mitchell Trubisky actually support, Allen Robinson in the past. Like with Drew Lock, it's just been, it's been tough. Like, we haven't seen him really support anyone. We haven't seen Geno Smith support anyone. So still, they're not that far, honestly, away from each other. And like, I'm below consensus on both. So remember, ADP is also part of the way I make sure that I anchor my rankings, because, the market, is typically pretty accurate. So I certainly have guys that I'm going to be higher and lower than the market on, and I'm lower than the market on both. I'm lower than the market on Deontay Johnson. I'm lower than the market on DK Metcalf. So I do think it's a slightly better quarterback situation, but the ADP is also, richer on Deontay Johnson than what it is on DK Metcalf. So like right now, Deontay Johnson's going as the wide receiver 15. Over at FFPC, I've got him at wide receiver 20. Right now, Metcalf's going as wide receiver 19. I have him as wide receiver 25. So I essentially have them both 5 to 6 spots behind ADP. So, and again, like, that's the range where I just call them a fade. But to be clear, like, if all of a sudden DK Metcalf falls to you, 12 spots past ADP, like, I'm taking him in those scenarios. So, I mean, I had to put rules in place for what I called a fade and an opportunistic buy, so I wasn't like bouncing all over the place. So when you hear me say opportunistic buy, it's basically like, what? Look, six spots past ADP at quarterback, it's larger, but I say that in the article, like, as an opportunistic buy. Like, a round is still opportunistic. Once you get over that, I'm saying that, basically it has to be a round or more. Like, those are guys I'm calling fades, but at the right price, everyone can still be, someone that you target.
I think Metcalf, if you wanted to say he's a top 10 real life wide receiver, there's an argument for that.
I think he's a top 6 real life receiver.
Okay. The only other wide receiver I think that you can say that for, that's not going inside the top 24 fantasy wide receivers, is DeAndre Hopkins, obviously, because he is suspended for 6 games. Just makes you think, Dwayne. But I understand, definitely not going out of your way to get these guys. Enough red flags. I just want to make sure we're not,
And look, Metcalf, again, he's just unlucky, man. It's the quarterbacks. It's the fact that they want to run the ball even in trailing scripts. It's the fact that they don't run enough plays. It's just everything piling up. And Tyler Lockett's still there. Noah Fant has to get something. I mean, it's just
maybe
it's a bad combination, of multiple factors. It takes a lot to push someone like DK Metcalf down. Like, I've mentioned it before. If DK Metcalf played with Tom Brady, he'd probably be the wide receiver 1 in all of our ranks. Like, if DK Metcalf played, with Josh Allen, he'd be the number 1 wide receiver maybe in all of our ranks. And again, like, let's say Stephon Diggs wasn't there. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors here, but like, it just doesn't.
It feels wild to me.
Worst situation possible.
It feels wild to me that, like, if Kirk Cousins got hurt tomorrow and Sean Mannion was the Vikings starting quarterback, would we drop Justin Jefferson from wide receiver 2 to wide receiver 26?
We would drop Justin Jefferson a lot. I think it's
that much. Man.
Yeah, but I don't have all the other factors either. I don't also have to deal with the coaches. I don't have to also deal with the volume. I don't also have to deal with the worst offensive line grade in PFF. Like, it's a combination of factors. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, Justin Jefferson would move down. I mean, you've done the great research on what the wide receiver 1s look like when they have these really crappy quarterbacks, and it's just hard. It's hard for them. I think that's the right question to ask. Like, I think that's a really good question.
I know I brought this up about Metcalf before, and I have him ranked wide receiver 25. I'm not.
But I think it's fair, because I look at him every day, dude, on the list, and I think, dude, what an awesome player. What an awesome player.
Out of all these wide receivers in this tier, Metcalf is the one that I'm like terrified of looking up in week 1 primetime game against the Broncos, and he's just running away from the secondary for his second chunk touchdown of the game. We're like, man, we really overthought DK freaking Metcalf here. Still got some more time to figure it out. Dwain, let's not make this a 2-hour pod. Let's go through the middle, late rounds, focusing mostly on your key targets. Again, this article is on PFF.com where Dwain spells out everything you need to know about the optimal draft strategy for wide receivers. Going into the middle rounds, 7 through 11, you write, these 5 rounds are loaded with great targets across all positions. If you don't have a quarterback or tight end yet, they are also likely on your shopping list, leaving 3 picks between running backs and receivers. So again, it depends how many wide receivers you already have on your roster in this range. But if you still need a good amount, well, you're in luck because there are plenty of them. Dwain, your centerpieces again for rounds 7 through 11, Rashad Bateman, Hunter Renfrow, DeAndre Hopkins, Russell Gage, who, yes, we've talked about it. He has now dropped off this list, Kadarius Toney, and Sky Moore. I guess before maybe we get into those guys, though, is this where Michael Thomas fits? Or are we moving up even higher? I could argue right now, as things stand, this is probably where he fits, but he has the potential to go even higher. Man.
I think Michael Thomas is going to be going. I think he'll end up being a 5th or 6th round pick.
Yeah.
He's a 7th round pick right now.
Okay.
So I think he's going to end up being in the bucket above the early middle rounds. And the way I would treat Mike Thomas, he's going to be, we've got really good news right now. So I don't know if I would make him a centerpiece yet, but it's going to be kind of hard not to. Like I put out a tweet earlier, just looking like, here's the range of outcomes for Michael Thomas based on his historical route participation and his targets per route run. And basically I gave a low end that says Michael Thomas is a lesser version of himself. And there's way more, target competition, with the high end being the rest of the offense is still struggling. Olave doesn't come along and Michael Thomas is still peak Michael Thomas. Like in that scenario, like we could still see 160 targets, but I think like the median range for Thomas is 120 to 130 targets if he's healthy. And I think that's going to be really hard to fade, in the 5th or 6th round of drafts, especially I think the 6th round is where he's the sweet spot, Ian. Like I would take Michael Thomas over Jerry Jeudy, over Darnell Mooney. I think you could make an argument over him, over Allen Robinson. I would take him over Adam Thielen, and I would take him over Gabriel Davis. I think where it's a little more tricky. I have Godwin one spot ahead, but I have them next to each other.
I know it's so tough because you could argue the same Julio thing about this becoming a 4 wide receiver rotation, and that could drag down Godwin a little bit. And you don't need to put Gage's film on that long to start realizing that he could start getting, some of just those basically extensions of the run game. Those just quick screens at the line of scrimmage that Godwin usually lives on. Now maybe they have another guy to help take those. But we're also talking Tom Brady versus Jameis Winston. I have Michael Thomas one spot ahead for now. I'm not tweeting out there, Dwain. I'm not, I'm not standing on it, super sure though. But I agree with those other guys.
Dude, I got Thomas at wide receiver 22 now. I've got Godwin at 21. I think you're 19 and 20 on them.
I'm 18 and 19. I feel like we can even jump them ahead of Waddle, Deontay, and a banged up Marquise Brown right now.
I think that's potentially in the range as well. I still want to hear a little bit more, right? We're at the very beginning. Like I don't want to deal with a setback. And here's the thing, it's going to take ADP a minute to start catching up. So we have time to kind of adjust it as we go. If the positive reports keep coming, we could give them one more little bump, and I don't think we have to do it all today. Like we've already given them, Michael Thomas and Godwin both jumped way up our ranks like overnight. So but yeah, I think there's a scenario where you could start to think about them, over those players. So, or at least being in the same tier, right, with all those players, and you may be mixing them up, or it's your preference. Yeah. So as far as the centerpieces, and so this is rounds 7 through 11 in your drafts, and again based on ESPN home league type ADP right now, Bateman, goes 2 rounds sooner in FFPC main event drafts. So in $2,000 drafts, people are taking Rashad Bateman 2 rounds sooner. Hunter Renfrow, look, he's going to see a career high in routes. Even if he's got to deal with Devontae Adams, as a target cap, I get it. But we've got an offense that loves to keep the slot receiver on the field. We'll use them in that Z underneath stuff, move them around in motion, even when they're using 2 tight ends, all that stuff. So that's a real good thing for Renfrow. And then yesterday, or whenever it was we were on, you asked me if I could name the backup Raider receiver, and basically we can't. So that's the other positive for Renfrow. Like he's going to have to be out there. So in his talent profile already suggests that he's a wide receiver 2, and you're going to buy him as a low end wide receiver 3 in your draft. So like him a little less in half PPR, not near as strong in full PPR. Russell Gage, we already talked about moving him down, so he won't be on this list. But Kadarius Toney is the next one in play, and if you look at him, he goes in round 8 right now in these other drafts. And right now you're getting Kadarius Toney in round 10 over on ESPN and leagues like that. So it's a big discount. Like, look, you've heard us talk about Toney, but look, a 26% targets per route run, a 2.08 yards per route run, and a 74.4 PFF receiving grade, all top notch as a rookie. Like, those put you in elite category. Now, it was a limited sample size, but I think when you go watch Kadarius Toney play, you don't have to watch very long to know that it's real. It's real. He's just got to stay healthy. He's got to stay out of the doghouse. But I think he could push for huge targets. The thing is with Toney, Ian, I'm not that sold on Kenny Golladay at this age. Was never really a great route runner, never really a great separator. Fine, he can be the down the field. Like, if I had to pick roles and we think that we've got a situation where we're going to see a similar offense to what we saw in Buffalo last year with DeBoll, like, I would say Golladay is most likely to play more the role that we saw with a Gabriel Davis, the down the field stretcher. Toney would be the guy if they're willing to dice it up and say, look, this is our potentially Stephon Diggs, right? He's got to come through and hold his end of the bargain, but the underneath, the hitches, the quick slants, all that kind of stuff that Stephon Diggs does, I think Toney's perfectly built for that stuff. And then
that's why he's going 40 picks ahead of Golladay. But no, I think it's fair. And even though he's going 40 picks ahead of Golladay, to potentially have that role, you can start comparing him versus, a bunch of muddled up Chiefs guys. And man, these Giants wide receivers, even if you do think it's Toney instead of Golladay, that's going to be the number one, we are still talking about one of the 3 to 5 cheapest number one pass game options in all fantasy football.
Absolutely. And it could be Golladay, right? And so you can still throw darts at him. But Toney just hits the metrics that we want from a breakout standpoint. I think the reasons Toney face plans is if for some reason we just have to continue to deal with injuries or he pisses off the coaches. And like, that's out of our hands. We don't know what's going to happen with that. We can't predict it. But look, Toney, I will say, because Bateman and these other guys go a little bit lower, a little bit above. Like, let's say you're sitting there and for some reason you only have 2 wide receivers, coming into this range, and you add Bateman as a third or whatever. Like, Toney needs to be a priority because of the upside. The upside for Toney is higher than Renfrow because Toney, I think Renfrow gives you the better floor because, I think there's just less baggage around Renfrow. But the ceiling case is for Toney because he could truly come out and just become the alpha in his offense. Renfrow can't do that, right? Renfrow's a good player, but he's got blockers. He's on a better team with a better quarterback. But Toney literally could be a 25, 30% target share player in an offense. So you got to prioritize him, especially if you waited. Just prioritize Toney, period. But especially if you waited at receiver. And then the last one here is Sky Moore. You're hearing more and more good things about him out of Chiefs camp over the last couple of days. But look, I mean, it's just an unsettled pecking order. You can get Sky Moore right now, in round 11, of your fantasy drafts. Nobody really knows who he is. And like, he's free. And I think he's the best chip right now still to put down on obviously Travis Kelce, but you got to take him in the first round. But I would rather take Sky Moore than Juju in the 5th. I'd rather take Sky Moore in the 11th. I would rather take Sky Moore in the 11th than dealing with trying to, take MVS, a round or two earlier. Now, to be fair, MVS is going more in the same range as Sky Moore over in home league. So you don't have, he's more doable, right, in that type of format. But I would still pick Moore, just a guy that was really great on the routes that are most used by NFL teams. The staple routes, you guys can find that over on PFF. It's actually not even behind a paywall. So you can go look it up and you can see, the data that I put together on Sky Moore, a very ready NFL receiver. So those are all great players to go after. Just real quick, opportunistic buys. We're going to leave Thomas out because that's where he was when we didn't know about injury. But Juju Smith-Schuster, and remember, folks, opportunistic buys really mean just if they go a little past ADP, we're going to buy them. Not necessarily crazy about them at ADP. Smith-Schuster, it's just the fact that he does at least get to play, in an offense with Patrick Mahomes. He does get to play from the slot. We know he's had a big season in the past. His talent profile has been terrible since his breakout season. That's the if. So he comes with baggage. He could be totally cooked. He could totally be cooked. Nobody wanted to sign him, but he's an opportunistic buy. And over in home leagues, he's just a lot more affordable, Ian, than what you got to do over in some of these other formats. With Juju, you can get him in the 7th round. He's going in the 5th round over on Underdog. He's going in the 5th and 6th round over on FFPC. And then my fades, again, it's the Seahawks offense. Again, these players at any certain price, like, you can still buy Lockett. I may need to reconsider Robert Woods, like, just because like he's not even wearing like a sleeve anymore on his knee. So part of this was an older player dealing with injury. Michael Gallup is a fade. He's still not practicing. This might just be the season, Ian, that we look back and think we were just wrong about every injury prediction, right? We've already got Godwin off the board, Michael Thomas off the board. If all of a sudden Gallup starts practicing next week, we're going to have to move Gallup back up. But right now I had Gallup as a fade on the idea that he's not playing until November. Like, what are we doing even drafting him?
Maybe the 9-month thing turns into more of a 7-month thing.
Right.
You know, Achilles, it wasn't that long ago that ACL was reviewed as career threatening. So, you know, science, man. So, hey, we went through, the doctors are also learning this new stuff. So, you know, don't be
and
mad.
that wasn't definitely
definitely not
a barb thrown at any. I love the work that's being done. I think it's one of the huge areas of fantasy that's taken the biggest step forward. And I love it because I don't know all that stuff, and I like to be able to lean on, you know, an expert, and I still will. And I think it could either just end up being, you know, something where this was just an anomaly, right? Or it could be something to your point, like maybe things are really changing here. So I think it's just something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. I would just say with Robert Woods, what's his ceiling outcome,
That's
man?
right. That's the problem.
AJ Brown had to freaking do everything he could to get triple-digit targets in this offense. Treylon Burks, getting really good news about him opening up training camp, just being in better shape and it not really being as much of an issue as it was made out to be during OTAs. Like, my concern with Robert Woods is also, I put his over under a rush attempts at like 2, man. Yeah. Like, I just don't see him getting those same fly sweep looks in a Titans offense that's never really done that. AJ Brown could not get rush attempts in this offense. Like, he took that one as a rookie against the Saints. They gave him a toss on like a reverse and he goes 60 yards to the house and he could barely get one after that. Like, I just think Robert Woods, Bobby Trees, he's a better real life player than fantasy asset. Like, when he went to the Titans originally to be the number 2 to AJ Brown, even at that point, it was tough for me to be able to see the actual way for him to win. And I get now you take away AJ Brown, Treylon Burks isn't the same definitive number 1. It's just, man, 30-year-old coming off an ACL and a guy that, really freaking
he
good.
He hasn't posted a 2.0 plus yards per route run since 2018. That's a long time. Coming off the ACL, you mentioned 30 years old. Historically, he's only been a 20 to 21% target per route player, right? Which is a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in an offense that's going to be run heavy, right? So I'm with you. And so, I mean, I wrote that in here, the trifecta of injury, age, and historical wide receiver 3, you know, targets per route run just isn't inspiring. You know, I mean, I think the way that Woods comes through is if Burks completely face plants, but even then, to your point, I don't think the upside is there for where Robert Woods is at in his career. Treylon Burks is still the player I would rather target in drafts.
All right, Dwayne, rounds 12 and on. I just want to quickly run through your targets here. Basically, still some good value. I would anticipate some of these guys, you know, creeping up more into the earlier rounds as we get closer and closer to week 1. But for now, take advantage.
Read that optimal strategy based on start part, like at the top. Like, I think that's the key.
Drafting the upside running backs in this range is preferred in 2022. This is one reason to consider having 6 wide receivers on your roster before this point. I couldn't agree more. There's still a lot of good handcuff value this late in the draft. However, if you need wide receivers, the 12th and 13th rounds are critical. So with that in mind, Jacoby Myers still looking very much as set up as the Patriots' number 1 receiver. Are getting some nice words out of camp about Devontae Parker, but again, let's chill out on training camp highlights. And hey, Parker's going outside the top 60 wide receivers as well. So I don't think this needs to be a Myers or Devontae Parker thing. It can always be both. Rondale Moore, the constant drumbeat, Dwayne, we've been talking about it all off season. And we got another piece like from Cliff Kingsbury literally yesterday that I was tweeting out, where once again, Cliff cited the Christian Kirk role and said, yeah, Rondale's going to fill that. We expect him to have a huge role in this offense. So if he said that once, it'd be one thing. But to say it like a legit 4 separate times all throughout the offseason and for it to make sense, I continue to be in on Rondale Moore right there with you. Jahan Dotson, first-round pick that is being priced just way behind the other first-round picks, has a legit chance to be the number 2 in this offense. It's funny to me, Dwayne, I agree that there is something to be said about wide receivers getting to work more out of the slot, but people like it just seems to break their brains sometimes when we get these reports about it. They don't know whether to say it's a good thing or a bad thing. Like the fact that Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel are working into the slot, like to me, that tells me we're probably going to see more 11 personnel and that both guys have a really good chance of staying on the field more snaps than not. Like, if anything, I think if you're being pigeonholed into the slot, like that's more of a negative than a positive.
Yeah, I agree. And same thing with Kadarius Toney, right? You know, seeing that he's working outside, kicking in some. Wandell is really starting, you know, in the slot. The main thing I took away is, well, wow, Kadarius Toney could be on the field all the time if he's going to get to play outside, because a team can mix in 12, 13 personnel. They can do other things. And then that knocks you off the field. So yeah, I'm with you. And folks, remember, a lot of this stuff, when you're playing the outside Z type position, and Ian, you know football, you can talk people through this. Like the X is typically more the vertical field stretcher kind of player, gets more of the vertical stuff. Now football's changing, like where everyone's doing everything. But Toney, like even if he plays outside as an example, like he's going to work more, underneath. Even if he's starting outside, they'll put him in motion, do different things with him. Same thing that we talked about with a few minutes ago with Hunter Renfrow. He's a slot receiver, but when he kicks outside, he's still running a lot of the same routes. They do different things to help maneuver them, get them the matchups they want and all those things. So yeah, I think sometimes we like slot. It's better. From a matchup standpoint, sometimes you get more matchup against zone, against linebackers, safeties, and that can help you. But at the end of the day, like it probably is overreacted to. And so, yeah, with Dotson, I like it. With Rondell Moore, who's also in this tier, I also like it.
Tim Patrick, talking about him, at length all offseason. Some murmurs from Robert Mays over at The Athletic that maybe Tim Patrick could be looking at a big slot role in this offense. Obviously, we know he is more than capable of working on the outside in 2 wide receiver sets. Just, again, with a new quarterback, with him already being paid, the discrepancy in ADP between him, Judy, and even Sutton has never made sense all offseason. Jalen Tolbert, potential to start for Jalen Tolbert's basically the new Russell Gage. I mean, we've kind of comped him as this all off season, but the fact that Godwin looks as healthy as he does, Gallup still getting back to the picture. Tolbert is the guy that could work as the number 2 option in this offense to start the year, even once Gallup gets back in the picture, still only sliding back to the number 3. So basically, you're drafting him, you could argue, even below his floor of what he's going to be once Gallup gets back in the picture. Also, Josh Palmer with the Chargers, arguably the handcuff for both Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. And nice early reports out of training camp that he could just seize that number 3 job all for himself ahead of Jalen Guyton. At this price point, it's worth taking that risk. And finally, Robbie Anderson. Baker Mayfield, yeah, it's the best quarterback of his career, Dwayne. Like other... I don't want to say that.
Robbie's an every other year guy.
I don't want to...
So... So this is a year to be on. This is the year to click.
Hold on. I want to take that back. I think Baker versus Teddy is legitimately close. I don't want to.
Yeah, I agree. At this point, I think Baker, is more willing to push the ball down the field, though. That's the difference. And that is what's going to help, Robbie Anderson. Now, they could flip roles again. 2 years ago, DJ Moore played, the vertical stretcher, and 180-pound Robbie Anderson was running in, with, trying to, make crackback plays. I don't know what that was. But last year, it was Anderson back to the vertical role, DJ more to the intermediate and underneath stuffs, which is what I think we'll still see. So yeah, all these players are fine. Just the only thing I would note here is, remember, if you really need a receiver here, rounds 12 and 13, like there's a clear drop between what you're getting in 12 and 13 and 14 and 15. In 12 and 13, you're getting Jacoby Myers, Jahan Dotson, Rondell Moore, Tim Patrick. 14 and 15, we're talking Devontae Parker, DJ Chark, Van Jefferson, George Pickens, Alec Pierce, Jalen Tolbert. A lot more questions. Those are fine dart throws, but I think in rounds 12 and 13, you can technically still get a player that you could roster as your wide receiver 4. You'd rather it be your wide receiver 5, but just remember that. These between round 12 and 13 down to 14 and 15, there's definitely a drop off in the type of profile that you're going to be dealing with. So if you're in a position where you need the receiver, you're going to have to probably spend a pick or 2 in round 12 and 13 versus waiting for 14 and 15. And the only challenge there is, again, a lot of these handcuffs we love, Darrell Henderson, Ronald Jones, Isaiah Spiller sometimes leaks into round 12. Those guys are all going in that range. So again, be planning ahead in your draft, and really, you probably don't want to have to be taking 2 in rounds 12 and 13. You're probably going to want at least one of those picks open to do something else. So just remember that.
It's going to wrap up this breakdown. I know we went a little bit longer than did a quarterback and running back, but you know what? It's wide receiver. This has always been a deeper position. Takes a little bit more time to get through. Again, you can check out.
We also had a little training camp news we dipped into. So yeah,
that's also true. Again, fantasy football draft strategy, optimal approach for picking wide receivers in 2022, available over at PFF.com, as well the optimal approach for picking tight ends that Dwayne and I will be breaking down this time tomorrow. So Dwayne, again, great work on all this. Anything else you have up at PFF.com this week?
No, the tight end stuff is up. And then obviously I've mentioned it already before, but working on a piece, just looking at like the number one thing we've got to be looking at, or might end up being the top 2 things for every team right now in training camp, like the storylines we need to be following and why they matter the most for fantasy football.
I had my top 200 rankings go live on Monday. Also did a quick hitting piece focusing just on Trey Lance after getting the news that Jimmy Garoppolo is, in fact, like not even practicing with the 49ers. And Kyle Shanahan finally, last year wouldn't even say if Jimmy G would be alive on Sunday. This year he is saying that this is Trey Lance's team now. So
I'm surprised we got that much of a declaration, to be honest.
Me too.
And it's what we needed. It's like what we needed, because the only concern was, oh my God, are we going to go into the year with Trey Lance having to look over his shoulder? The upside's always been there.
Yeah.
But now we know, like, look, they're going, with Trey Lance. So I moved him up to QB7.
There we go. It's time. I talked about being there right alongside with you, and just some of the concerns with the yards per attempt. Like, since Shanahan got to San Francisco, they've been second in yards per attempt behind only Sean McVay and the Rams on passes thrown behind, quote unquote, thrown behind the line of scrimmage since Debo got there first. So, like, basically Trey Lance doesn't even need to be a good real life quarterback for him to be the next great fantasy quarterback. Main basis of that story. Also looking at having a little shadow cornerback breakdown later this week. Spoiler, I think shadow matchups are overrated in a fantasy football sense, but they're still fun. And even in small sample sizes, we can look and see which cornerbacks have been particularly better or worse when under that assignment. So keep an eye out for all that. And thanks as always for tuning in, everyone. For Dwayne, I'm Ian. This has been the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. And until next time, take care. Everybody.